This video is sponsored by Lighter Creative. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from GTs and other large events over the course of the previous weekend. This being a holiday weekend in the United States means that we have less of a sample size to look at when we're talking about these events, but we did have several events go on overseas, so that's what we're mostly going to be focusing on this episode. Now, moving on to a metagame breakdown, we can see that Adeptus Mechanicus have taken the throne as one of the best performing factions of the weekend, taking down the Skovda Battleforge 5, as well as absolutely dominating the ADFWGA HeroCon with two 5-0 results on number 1 and number 2 at that event. It was a Found Route event, went to 2 undefeated, both of them playing Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, the undefeated Adeptus Mechanicus results this week were a combination of a Skitarii Hunter cohort and Halo Screed Battle Clades. What we're going to be doing today is talk about that Halo Screed Battle Clade, but they did have a Skitarii Hunter cohort sneaking in there at the HeroCon event. Now, up next to AdMech is, unsurprisingly, Ultramarines. With extensive use of their new Victrix Honor Guard units, they've been able to take down 3 events. That's the West Allotment at War 3, the YYC Friendship GT, as well as Heroes of the Mid-Table. Drukhari also coming out of the woodwork a little bit with some very strong showings at the Curtonian Total Carnage 7, as well as Winchester GT. We're going to talk about the Winchester GT this time around because the Curtonian Total Carnage did have a relatively standard Spectacle of Spite, which is the detachment that has been doing fairly well ever since it had kind of a debut at the World Championships of Warhammer. However, Winchester GT saw a little bit of a throwback to Reaper's Wager. Ultramarines weren't the only Space Marine chapter to do well this week, because we also saw Salamanders take down the Incursion event single GT, this being a Forgefathers Seekers detachment. So the Salamanders bespoke detachment, not a Firestorm Assault Force, which is the more popular playstyle for the faction. That's going to be very exciting to talk about. Grey Knights took down the Burn and Learn Volume 15. Chaos Knights going undefeated at Gonghammer 2025, which was also shared by Aeldari, also going 5-0 at that event. Death Guard won the Queensland Masters. Adepta Sororitas took down the OBSEC Presents Hearth GT, and Chaos Space Marines, last but certainly not least, also undefeated alongside Ultramarines at Heroes of the Mid-Table Fall. And with that, let's go ahead and talk about these lists in particular, just after a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Lighter Creative, and in addition to making a wide selection of laser-cut terrain, Lighter Creative has also branched out into battle mats and wants me to showcase to you their new battle mat style. The folks over at Lighter Creative have been hard at work developing a new material for tabletop gaming mats. We've seen neoprene mats and we've seen vinyl mats, but this is a slip-resistant rubberized vinyl that's incredibly flexible and incredibly precise. The nice thing that allows Lighter Creative to do is actually put grid lines on their mat. Now, obviously, we've seen these before in things like vinyl mats. The big benefit of these over neoprene is that this material doesn't stretch like neoprene does. So you actually get accurate sizes on all your map cuts. I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus here, but I did live stream an event recently where the mat on the championship table was just 59 inches long, which is a full inch too short. That doesn't happen with this style of vinyl terrain, and Lighter Creative has this new material that's crease resistant, has an anti-tear backing, and is actually slightly tacky, so it prevents your models and terrain from moving around. Now, we've talked about them in the past, but the grid lines and pre-placed objective markers on these mats are a life changer. They make it extremely easy to set up your boards, as well as to determine where things like deployment zones, table quarters, different areas of the battlefield for zone control are. We play a lot of Tabletop Simulator here on the channel, and these basically are like playing Tabletop Simulator, but in real life. So check out their mats as well as their selection of laser-cut terrain features in the link in the video description. And huge thanks to Lighter Creative for sponsoring this video. And now, back to the content. So we'll start our discussion today talking about Adeptus Mechanicus and Johannes Einemo going 5-0 with that detachment. In this case, Johannes was playing a Halo Screed Battle Clade led by Belisarius Call with no other characters. He had 2 units of Skitarii Rangers, 1 Scorpius Dune Rider, who could potentially be embarking some of those Skitarii Rangers, also acting as a jumping off point for Sicarian Rust Stalkers to give them a safe place to take the middle of the table. Of being a 40 mil based infantry unit, the embarkation of the Rust Stalkers into a transport transport actually reduces their total unit footprint quite a bit, so it actually makes them easier to hide, which is interesting. Also gives them a disembarkation movement, but you can also start them in with the Rangers to give scout to the transport and also a fire support effect to the Rangers as well. So lots of different ways we can use that transport. We have 2 units of 3 Iron Strider Ballistari to deal some damage, a Sicarian Infiltrator Squad, 10 infiltrators in that one, 3 units of 10 Sicarian Ruststalkers, 3 Scorpius Disintegrators, 2 of those with Ferromite cannons, one of them actually with a Belleros Energy Cannon to add some indirect fire to the army. That does help in a lot of matchups that are running lots of lighter infantry. Even other Adeptus Mechanicus armies do tend to get hit by that fairly hard, but also things like Aeldari, of course, that tend to run a lot of units that are relatively susceptible to the Belleros Cannon. And then last but certainly not least, a Calidus Assassin for utility and to command point tax enemies. Now, moving on to the second place placement of the week, this being Ultramarines, let's talk about Mark Owen's Gladius Task Force list. This list was built primarily around the combination of Victrix Honor Guard and Redemptor Dreadnoughts to add an incredibly resilient front line to the army. This includes a Captain, plus a Combi Weapon Lieutenant for utility, plus Marnius Calgar, no Rabute Gilliman seen here. However, the Captain gives an attachment for 1 Victrix Honor Guard unit, and Marnius Calgar can join the second one, so we have 2 of those powerful Victrix Honor Guard bricks. Now, only one of them is being equipped with the Ancient and the Chapter Champion, because those are Epic Hero models, so we can't duplicate them on both units. A lot of times what you'll do is you'll actually take the additional damage output from the Ancient and the Champion on the unit with the Captain, since he tends to get stuck in first, and it needs more support, since Marnius Calgar is a little bit more sustained damage, although it, I think, depends on the exact situations. Also, having the ability to pop the once per game bonus strength and attacks on the same turn that the Captain uses Finest Hour allows the unit to do quite a bit of damage. We have 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts forming that bulwark in the center, 2 units of Jump Back Assault Intercessors in order to act as utility units, 1 Gladiator Lancer, as well as 1 Ballistus Dreadnought. We have a Scout Squad as well as 2 units of Assault Jump Back Intercessors to act as utility, an Intercessor Squad for the backline, as well as 1 Gladiator Lancer and 1 Ballistus Dreadnought to add some long-range counterpunch to units trying to come in and deal with the Redemptor Dreadnoughts. Well, it does seem like this is a list that would be very good in Blades of Ultramar for the -1 to wound effect on the Redemptor Dreadnoughts. In this case, it does make sense in Gladius Task Force, since you get access to only in death does duty end to allow the Victrix Honor Guard to fight on death, which is super helpful. And then obviously we can still just use the Redemptor Dreadnoughts' strong baseline defensive characteristics to hold down the middle and then counterattack with mass attacks from those Victrix Honor Guard bricks. Now with that, we'll move over to the Winchester GT and talk about Martin Cooper's Drukhari. We've talked quite a bit over the last couple weeks about Spectacle of Spite, since it has done a lot of work in the faction. However, Martin over here was playing a little bit of an old school style, that being Reaper's Wager, which up until World Championships I think was much more common. This includes an Archon with Webway Walker, so he's going to be able to deep strike, as well as Lilith Hesperax. We do have as the sole Harlequin in the army a single Solitaire. That gives you a pretty strong disruption piece. He's incredibly fast and can clear infantry very well. And he can also act to flip the wager towards the end of your turn. If he does so at the end of your own fight phase, then oftentimes Harlequins will be winning the wager when it comes back to your subsequent shooting phase, unless you start killing things on your opponent's turn, in which case you're going to get wound rerolls for most of a phase on your ranged attacks before you then move on to Drukhari winning the wager as soon as they destroy anything, which is kind of nice, but also just the Solitaire being a long-range, lone operative threat is super helpful. We have 2 units of Cabalite Warriors as well as a Witch Squad. We have Venoms for all 3 of those Cabalite Warrior squads as well as the Witches, so we're going to be able to combat squad all of those to give us a grand total of 6 5-model utility units plus the 3 transports, a pair of Hellion units, 1 unit of 5 and 1 unit of 10, alongside a unit of 10 Incubi. The Incubi are a great place to drop the Archon because he has Webway Walker. You're going to then be able to rapid ingress the Incubi out of Deep Strike, so they have a lot more options of where they can stand before they move in and actually get their charge off. And with the ability to advance and charge, thanks to Reaper's Wager, we can actually have a lot of flexibility about where that Incubi unit actually hits. We then have a pair of Mandrake squads, plus a pair of Reaver units for utility, 1 Scourge unit with Dark Lances, taking less of a ranged approach in this particular army, however, backing that up with strong melee between especially the Incubi bricks, the 10-model Hellion brick, and then, last but certainly not least, a pair of Talos, all of those equipped with twin Haywire blasters for anti-vehicle shooting, plus obviously their impressive melee output. Definitely a much more aggressive variety of Reaper's Wager than we've seen in the past, not focusing on things like shooting platforms like Scourges or Ravagers, and in this case, basically trying to go all in on some of the melee options that Drukhari have access to. Now, with that, let's move over and talk about an incredibly spicy list this week, that being Salamanders as the second appearance of Space Marine Chapter this week next to Ultramarines. Andy Moore at the Incursion Events 40K Singles GT took that event down with a 5-0 record with the list, playing Forgefather Seekers, not Firestorm Assault Force, which is very cool. Obviously, a lot of times we've seen Salamanders do well with Firestorm Assault Force. It's very straightforward, and it gives you a lot of transport synergies as well as Champion of Humanity, which allows a unit to ignore modifiers if you attach it to a Tacticus Lieutenant or something like that. Crazy powerful enhancement. However, you do have some bonuses from Forgefather Seekers, especially the ability to advance and perform actions, shoot and perform actions on Infernus Marines, as well as the ability to fall back and shoot with infantry, which is something that Firestorm Assault Force has no access to. I'm actually talking about Salamanders quite a bit here because I did just record a getting started video for that faction that will be releasing in a week or two's time. In this case, Andy was playing Adrax Agatone as well as Vulcan Heston, a jump pack captain with the Immolator enhancement. This gives +1 attack to all torrent weapons included in the unit. This also includes the captain himself, which means that he's going to be firing D6 +1 shots from his hand flamer. We then have a combi weapon lieutenant for utility. For the back line, we're taking an intercessor squad. We do have a 6-model Blade Guard veteran squad for Adrax Agatone to jump into. Obviously, that combination is one of the most effective access to melee units that Salamanders have. You get reroll 1s to hit from the Blade Guard veterans, full wound rerolls on Adrax, so the unit itself is almost, not quite, but almost full hit and wound rerolls, and then also has access to +1 to wound thanks to Crucible Battle. Incredibly strong offensive piece. We have a company hero squad for Vulcan Heston to hop into, so he can move forward aggressively, use his ability to get wound rerolls on stuff, and then hopefully not die in the return fire. We have a single Incursor squad to buff some of the melee attacks. One Infernus squad, only 5 Marines there to act as a utility unit for the army. Obviously, they get all those bonuses from being a Salamanders chapter, +1 OC from Vulcan Heston, plus the ability to advance and do stuff like perform actions or shoot and perform actions from the detachment. We have a single Scout squad, as well as a 5-model Vanguard veteran squad with hand flamers as some additional utility. One Impulsor, which can carry around potentially the Incursors and or the Infernus Marines. You can actually start the Incursors in the Impulsor and scout it, then disembark them, perform a utility action with them, and refill it with Infernus Marines. We then have 10 Vanguard veterans, so 1 unit of 5 of them with hand flamers plus a unit of 10. That's for the jump back captain to hop into, get +1 attack to all of those guys, so you're firing 10 or 11 d6 plus 11 hand flamer shots, assuming they're all able to get into range, and you can discount stratagems like Rapid Ingress coming out of reserve, or also Immolation Protocols for devastating wounds on those. If you're able to target the thing that Vulcan Heston targeted, you're also getting wound rerolls. So on average, you're firing somewhere around 45 to 48 flamer attacks, wounding on 6s, then re-rolling, meaning you're probably handing your opponent somewhere around 15 or 16 devastating wounds, which is a lot. And if you are targeting something that you can get +1 to wound against, you can even just be wounding naturally on 5s. So in addition to that, hand them a bunch of natural armor saves as well. Incredibly powerful combination. Obviously, it does require some setup. You do have to probably Rapid Ingress the unit into position, then move and attack. They could advance and do that as well because of the assault that you get from the detachment ability. But if you can combo it all off, it's going to do some crazy damage. We then have a bunch of vehicles. I mentioned the Impulsor already, but we also have 2 Gladiator Valiants. So we're going to be able to get wound rerolls off of the Vulcan Heston for the Multi-Meltas equipped with those guys, which is nice. A Land Raider Redeemer, as well as a Storm Speeder Hammer Strike. The Redeemer is likely the transport option for Adrax Agatone, since it can then move and then disembark him into combat. Now let's move over to the Queensland Masters, which was won by Death Guard, being piloted by Joshua Woods. Joshua was playing an interesting variety of Virulent Vectorium. So this is the kind of index detachment that gives your entire army objective secured. He has a little bit of synergy with that detachment in this particular build. This includes a pair of 10 model Plague Marine squads, both of those being attached with Biologous Putrefiers and Malignant Plaguecasters for the 5+ critical, lethal, and sustained combination. Those also have Chaos Rhinos to embark them into as well, which gives you an incredible amount of midboard control. The benefit there too is that you do then have objective secured and could potentially be disembarking a transport. So even if your opponent kills the transport, you disembark a bunch of OC2 Plague Marines on it. At the start of your next turn, they'll unbattle shock, take the objective, and then obsec it under your control. Similarly, we are also running 2 Poxwalker squads, so we can threaten objective control of the center of the the table with one of them with their infiltration. And in addition to that, we also have Mortarion, the great man himself, who can deep strike. So we can start him in reserve and then try to rapid ingress him onto objectives in order to objective secure them on top of that. Interestingly, we have no Terminator equipped units whatsoever. There is a Tallyman for the backline, but no Lords of Contagion, no Lords of Virulence, so no other buffs for the ranged attacks. However, we do have a pair of Plague Spitter fitted bloat drones, so those guys equipped with the Flamers equivalent. We have a trio of heavy blight launcher fitted bloat drones to act as some backline shooting, plus a pair of Chaos Spawn for utility. So a little different than we typically see, where oftentimes we'll see Mortarion act with rapid ingress as a delivery system for Death Shroud Terminators, who are able to then 6-inch deep strike close to him. In this case, we're just going to be using him as a big bully himself. He can use reactive moves on Plague Marines nearby to allow them to re-embark transports. So we do have a little bit of synergy between him and the transports themselves. So we do have a little bit of synergy between him and those Plague Marine bricks. Now, who are we going to call to destroy a Demon Primarch like Mortarion? Let's call Ash Power and his Warpbane Task Force, Grey Knights. This was from the, I guess, appropriately named Burn and Learn Volume 15, which I guess it was appropriate that we won it with, that it was won by someone named Ash. In this case, Ash was playing a pair of Brotherhood Librarians. These guys are actually kind of sweet utility. They have pretty strong shooting from the Vortex of Dooms. You also have the opportunity to give attached units an 18-inch lone operative effect, but in this case, we weren't using that because there's very little synergy between the Terminator armored units and Warpbane Task Force itself. The Brotherhood Librarians just end up as one of the cheaper character options in the Codex, so they're usable as little independent utility guys. And given the fact that they shoot pretty hard, they're able to hop into your hallowed ground from deep strike, and with both of their powers combined, usually knock a unit down with full hit rerolls from the detachment ability. We then have Castellan Crow, a pair of Nemesis Grandmaster Dread Knights, plus 2 Interceptor squads for utility, a standard Dread Knight. So we have a unit that can threaten a long distance on the table without needing to rapid ingress or use some other chicanery to get close to enemies. We then have 2 standard 5-man Purifier squads to act as Hallowed Beacons, plus 1 10-model Purifier squad to attach with Castellan Crow and be a big shooting battery. In this case, we are equipping all of the Purifiers with melee weapons. None of them were equipping any ranged weapons whatsoever, besides their standard Purifying Flame and Stormbolter. However, we were including a Purgation squad, that including 4 Silencer Purgators, plus a Razorback. So we are all able to use that as a little bit more of an offensive ranged piece. The Razorback can push forward, disembark that unit, fire at the target to get +1 AP, so we can actually get an AP value on our silencers, and then blast a bunch of silencers away without having to expose the Purifiers, with potentially full rerolls plus the sustained hits on the silencers as well. Pretty cool stuff. We have then a standard strike squad for utility and to OBSEC, the home objective. Interesting to see the Purgation squad be played. It's not a unit that we've seen very often. It does make sense to include it with the Racerback, and the Racerback also works as a good attachment option for either Purifiers or Interceptors, especially since the Interceptors can jump in and out of the transport if they so desire. Now, sticking with a similar variety of knights, let's move over to Gonghammer 2025 and talk about Nathan Princey, who went undefeated with an Infernal Lance. Now, this is a pretty standard variety of Infernal Lance. We've talked about almost identical lists quite a bit in the past. This includes a trio of Knight Despoilers. One of them has Bestial Aspect for assaults on his Gatling Cannons. All of those guys equipped with Gatling Cannons, Rocket Pods, and Heavy Dark Flamers. We then have a trio of War Dog Carnivores with Havoc Multi-Launchers, 1 Beast of Nurgle, 2 Nurgling units to hold down the midboard, plus the big man himself, Rotigus. We've talked about this list quite a bit. You have incredible shooting and resilience from the Knight Despoilers. You're able to hold down the middle of the table with Rotigus, who can either hold down objectives to prevent your opponent from claiming them with his OC reduction aura, or even reduce their movement so they aren't able to get to grips with the Knights. He can sort of stall out the game for long enough that the Knights can shoot your army to death and then dominate the control of the objectives by themselves. Now, even though Chaos Knights won the Gonghammer 2025, they were not the only undefeated list. Aeldari, also an undefeated 5-0 at that event. This was Greg McGinnity who went undefeated with an Aspect Host. And you might recognize a lot of the units included in this Aspect Host list because they are very recognizable. This includes the, I guess, quintet of powerful Phoenix Lords: Azurban, Behareth, Fuegan, Janezar, and Lycus. We do have a Corsair Void Reaver squad to hold down the battle line, act as some scouting utility, plus a Wave Serpent and a Falcon. That Falcon is going to be for Azurban's unit to hop into and then disembark, get the benefit of fire support, fire their guns, then get back into the Falcon and re-embark for use of the rerolls again later on. The Wave Serpent is then for Fuegan's big unit of Fire Dragons. They're going to hop out, blow something up, and then use Skyborn Sanctuary to jump back in. We have, to that end, one big unit of 10 Fire Dragons, plus a unit of 5 Dire Avengers to unlock those combos. We do have a unit of 5 Howling Banshees for Janezar to join into, 3 units of Rangers for utility, 3 units of Swooping Hawks for some additional utility, one of them for Behareth to hop into, plus 3 units of Warp Spiders as well, one of those with a Power Blade array for Lycus to improve with her enhanced critical lethal hit effects. A relatively standard Eldar aspect host, good stuff. Essentially the same as we've seen a bunch of times before. Now, moving on to the OBSEC Presents Perth GT. This was won by Matthew Dean running Adepta Sororitas. And Matthew was playing a relatively standard but an interesting version of Champions of Faith, a detachment that buffs the Sacrosanct units inside the army. This includes a trio of Hospitallers to attach to 3 10-model units of Celestian Sacrosancts. Those girls are going to get -1 to be wounded from having an attached character, a 5+ feel no pain from the Hospitaller, and D3+1 reanimations every single battle round if you pay miracle dice for them. Incredibly resilient, also access to a -1 to hit in the detachment as well. So that's the main bulwark of the Champions of Faith build, but we're also running Morvenval and, interestingly, St. Celestine. In this case, St. Celestine is running on her lonesome. We're not taking any additional jump pack units to attach her into, but she is sort of annoying to deal with, especially given the fact that she can use Marnius Calgar's style of feel no pain sharing, where once you assign saves to the unit, you can lose 1 Gemini Superior, retain 1 of them. She grants a feel no pain to Celestine. Celestine can eat the remainder of the damage, then potentially respawn later on. So as an independent utility unit, it's actually very difficult to engage with. We then have a pair of Immolators. Those each are going to embark a combat squad of Dominions, each of those equipped with 4 Meltaguns. No Flamers on any of these combos, by the way. These are all Meltagun Dominions with multi-Melta equipped Immolators, but that gives you 2 scouting units plus 2 additional utility units you can use to hold down the backline. But the scouting units can start the peace trade early. You can then follow that up with the Celestian Sacrosancts, who can then sort of dominate the middle of the table. That's all backed up by some pretty strong backline shooting. Oh, there's a Sanctifier squad as well to compound the scout game plan in the early game, but then we also have a pair of Retributor squads for some late game punch, because they're going to get the benefit of that +1 to hit and wound, targeting units that have killed any of these forward operating units, the scouts or the Celestian Sacrosancts. We have a Paragon Warsuit squad for Morvenval to hop into, and we have a single autocannon equipped Castigator. Now, last but certainly not least, let's talk about our final army of the weekend, and this is going to be Chaos Space Marines. This was also at the Heroes of the Mid-Table Fall, which ended up being won by an Ultramarine Stormlands task force using Victrix Honor Guard, but the second place placer, who also went 5-0, was Patrick Greatbatch, running a very aggressive version of Renegade Raiders. This is the Chaos Space Marine detachment that focuses on fast infantry, gains bonuses targeting enemies on objectives, and bonuses for disembarking transports. To that end, we are playing a pair of Chaos Lords. One of them has the Dread Reaver enhancement, so that gives him a floating reroll when he's wholly within 12 inches of your opponent's deployment zone, which, to be fair, is most of the time that he is disembarking a transport, then potentially advancing and charging onto an opposing objective. There are Legionary units to attach all of the Chaos Lords, so when they use their once per game ability, they're going to get those additional melee improvements, plus a Devastating Wound Demon Hammer, rerolling those wound rolls from the Legionnaires attachment in order to get additional devastating wounds. We have Cypher to muck with opponent's command point generation, plus Fabius Bile, a Cultist Mob, 3 units of Legionaries, so 2 attachments for the 2 Chaos Lords, 1 additional unit that we can use for utility. The other nice thing about these two is that you do have a unit of guys with a bunch of chain swords who get wound rerolls targeting objectives, and those are also going to get potentially advance and charge bonuses from the detachment and the AP bonus, so they're good at trading against other utility units. So the last unattached unit of Legionaries is still going to be super helpful. Fabius Bile is going to hop into into a big unit of 10 Chosen, so he can grant them his leadership buff for the +1 strength and attacks to the bodyguard models. There is a Chaos Rhino for them to hop into as well, so that's another relatively long threat range advance and charge unit. We have a unit of Chaos Bikers for utility. Other benefit that these guys have is that they can fall back at the end of a fight phase, so even if you come and tag them at the end of your opponent's turn, potentially they could move 12 inches, fall back, put 6 OC on an objective to flip it for you to then come score. So they can be really obnoxious to deal with in Renegade Raiders specifically. We have some shooting presented by 2 Chaos Predator Destructors to get the +1 AP targeting enemies on an objective, a single Beast of Nurgle and a single Nurgling Swarm to act as utility units and to hold down the midboard. And then we have a bunch of additional melee threat. That includes a Nemesis Claw, which can prevent enemies from using stratagems when they're engaging them, which allows you to engage with multiple things like the Chosen and Legionary units or the Warp Talons and prevent enemies from being able to interrupt into that because you simply can't use the stratagem when the Nemesis Claw is engaging you. So it allows you to engage in broad multi-combats a lot more easily and mess with your opponent's defensive or offensive stratagems. We also then have that Warp Talon unit. These guys get some great benefits from Renegade Raiders, especially bonuses targeting enemies on objectives, which is huge, to allow them to more consistently kill their intended charge target and then return into reserve to then jump back in later. And with that, those are all the best armies of Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Let me know down in the comment section which list from this week is your favorite and what you think of the current metagame so far. Definitely feels like things are slowly percolating towards factions like Ultramarines and Adeptus Mechanicus, but it is still relatively wide open. Thanks to Lighter Creative for sponsoring this video. Thanks to everyone who supports Tactical Tortoise, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.